I'll let her tell that story.
I moved back to the University of Houston in 1956. I had been a student at North Texas State, but I met him shortly after I moved back. We were at a speech party together, and everybody was drinking at the speech party except me, and I guess you weren't.
No, I just came in.
And I was sitting on a stool in the kitchen. This is the speech professor's house. And I'm reading E.E. Cummings to this group
To a bunch of drunks.
And Dick walks in the kitchen and he says, "Who are you?"
What are you doing?
E.E. Cummings, one of my favorites at the time. And here's a beautiful lady sitting at a bar, not drinking, reading E.E. Cummings. I mean, come on, how could I avoid that? So we met then, yeah.
And we were both debaters, and we both wrote poetry. And we wrote a poem together, and it won the prize that year. That gave us $150, and that's what we got married on.
Aletheia. A-Letheia. You know what the river Lethe is, I hope.
Yes.
This is Aletheia. All the while a truthing. Whiling. Critically important, you know, in Heidegger's work and in Zaner's poetry. Aletheia. All the while a truthing. There is a certain darkness at the heart of every truth, a happening whose course is etched with rugged grain, cloven both with shock and tempting obstacles. Its path and flow, the gradual uncertain thrust of questing, whose shape is clean, sure questions, put with courage and dialogic grace. Truth is neither for shovels nor logic. It is the move from multiple to one, from shattering manyness to the vision of singularity transcendent, emergent out of, not chaos, but the heady quicksand of confusion, that viscous hiddenness, which, like Lethe, hides distinction by masking radiance, and is obscurity, undisclosed emergence out of the actual undergoing of unforgetting. To truth is the thing, a charge in passion from the vertigo of dark unknowing to the whitening poise of reciprocated light without loss. For the owl whose mission truthing is, takes flight first in midnight's madness, being there full-fleshed itself, for dawn to celebrate in covenant with metaphor. I came to the University of Houston after serving in Korea and in combat there in the Air Force, and coming back I was a bit older than other folks at that time.
Had you gone to school before you had gone to Korea, or did you go right out of high school?
Right out of high school.
Okay.
For a lot of reasons that needn't gone into here, but in any case that's what happened. And the Korean War was cut short, and so my time with the Air Force was cut short. So I had to go into the inactive service for 8 years, I think it was, but nothing happened because of that. In any case, so I was there and started taking courses, got fascinated with debate. I couldn't afford to take certain engineering courses, I couldn't afford to buy the tools, so I took philosophy instead. And I don't know why I met this man in the bookstore where I was working to help pay my way. It was Mary Snadenson. And what he did to me was shouldn't be done to anybody. I was working there as a student, right out of the Air Force, taking courses, taking 2 math courses and all kind of stuff. And he says, "You're interested in philosophy, are you?" I had not known the word very well, but yes, I said I was. I guess I was too embarrassed to say no. Like who in the hell are you to ask me that? I could have, but I didn't. He would have appreciated it, but I didn't, as it turns out. So he came wagging himself into the bookstore one day and gave me a list 3 pages long.
Or were they things that probably you eventually read with him? And
I read later, yeah, a lot of that stuff, but I don't remember much on the list now. It just stunned me.
So then you took classes with him?
I took classes with Maurice Snadenson. Boy, what a joy that was. What a privilege. What an incredible professor. And one day he invited a person for a lecture at the University of Houston, as was done typically, and it turns out to be Aaron Gurvich. Came to the University of Houston in Houston, Texas, this Lithuanian, German scholar. He came to give a lecture, and it's unforgettable what he said. Yeah, I don't remember a thing of what he said, except when I asked him a question, it was, "Why do you do this, Professor Gurvich?" He says, "Was?" And he pounds the table. He says, "Because I have to." I've never heard such things before. Scared the living lights out of me. But it was a brilliant talk. I remember that I'm being really impressed. And Nathanson talked to me later, and he said, "How'd you like that?" "Why don't you go to the new school?" he said. So I was still just, I think, a measly junior, so I went up to New York City that summer to see what I could see.
New York City.
I lived in $10 a week. I went to the new school, and who was there but Hans Jonas? I didn't know who Hans Jonas was. Jonas! No, I was Jonas to me. And I went and made an appointment with him, went in to see him, and I had mentioned in the appointment thing that I wanted to talk about the philosophy department, that I was interested in phenomenology. He says, Herr Zaner, you want to study phenomenology? Yeah? And I said, yes. And why is that? And I didn't know what to say. I said, I'm studying, and I stuttered, with Maurice Nathanson. Maurice, yeah. Nathanson, good man. Where are you from? And I said, well, we're in Houston now, but Arizona. His eyebrows went up. He says, Arizona? From Arizona, want phenomenology? I was stunned into silence. I don't remember what else happened. Got up there, and one of the first people I met was Alfred Schutz,
Oh my.
Maurice Nathanson's mentor for his second doctorate.
Right.
His first doctorate was at Nebraska. He'd then gone to the new school to study with Schutz because he knew of his work, and did a brilliant 900-page dissertation, only 200 pages of which was ever published, on George Herbert Mead, the American sociology philosopher.
Right.
But in any case, I met Schutz, and he asked me to come and meet him. I was living in a tiny little one-room apartment on 17th Street and 6th Avenue. Walk down to 8th Street to this cafe and go in, and he's not there. So I go in and I sit down, and the music is playing, and I order a sandwich or something anyway, and then here comes Herr Schutz. I don't know if you've ever seen pictures of Schutz, but he's the picture of a Germanic scholar. Comes and he sits down with me. Zaner. Yes. And he introduces himself, he sits down, and he scratches himself, and I go, all right. And I start talking. And he just very pleasantly nods, yes, nods. And then music comes off, and he turns it up and says, yeah, now you tell me. He was turning off his hearing aid because he couldn't stand the music. So I asked the guy to turn the music off, would you, for just a little while? And Schutz and I then talked. And I mentioned to him that I had these books of Kierkegaard and Marcel that I was beginning to enjoy. And he says, oh yes, that's what you shall write on. What? I'll do a master's thesis already. Yeah, you write on that. So Schutz is what assigned me to the writing on Gabriel Marcel.
Is that right?
Because he said you can learn from that, and he's a good thinker.
Yeah.
And we talked some more, and I met many times with him. I had 2 courses from him. Then he got very ill in the spring of that year, and died. And so he couldn't direct my master's thesis, and nobody else was available. I knew Dorian Cairns, Husserl called his greatest student, but Dorian was busy. So of all people who directed my master's thesis, it was Hans Jonas. Arizona! Ringing in my ears. How do you want to study phenomenology? Then he asked Marcel. Okay, Marcel's good. He read my thesis. The only comment he made when I finished, it was a 250-page master's thesis on the work of Gabriel Marcel, which discovered for me the whole issue of embodiment. And I was the first one, I guess, to write in English about that. But in any case, The only comment he made was, "Herr Zaner, you really know how to write a good English sentence." No comment on the content of it or anything. That was it. I was very fortunate in that I was able then to study with Aaron Gurvich, who was hired to replace Schutz. They were very close friends, as everybody knows now. There's a book out on their correspondence even.
Yeah.
And that was, to have Aaron Gurvich, one of the great people who knew Gestalt psychology so thoroughly, did the first study of Hans with Wertheimer. Cairns also knew Wertheimer, had studied with him even. Cairns had been in Germany and studied with Husserl there twice.
Right.
And Jonas, who's a German and studied with these people, who knew Jaspers real well. And what a privilege. Let me tell you, what I was really interested in doing, and what so intrigued me about phenomenology and the teachings that I was learning from Cairns and others, is the question of who am I, and why should I be interested in that, and where does it take me once I begin to focus that question, which took me right back to Kierkegaard, and much of his work there, particularly indirect communication and that sort of thing, and his great work on suffering. But I wanted to understand what the body has to do with all this. And doing the thing on embodiment made the question of self and other, the other person, the one that I love and that I hate and I fight with and that I admire, made that very problematic for me. Not that it didn't happen, I can see it all day long. Schutz was right. We simply take it for granted. Hume was right. We all just simply do it, that's all. Even though we don't have any good reason to trust that there's another person.
So the context of self, I actually think it's your touchstone. I actually think it was the place where you were able to exercise these themes in a way that generated the later works in a way that was transformative from the previous problems that you had looked at.
That's a strange title to have for a book, by the way. I never was settled on a good title for that. But I wanted to make my peace, one, with Hans Jonas, and I thought his misunderstanding of certain key things in phenomenology, and I wanted to make my peace with Kierkegaard and with Schutz, and other things I was beginning to learn about, Erwin Strauss's work, for example. Trying to be clear about what is it that the self is, and the other self, and how is it we come to be interconnected, and in what ways, and what's at stake in those encounters, and how can I make sense of all of that, because among other things, Schutz is interested in social interaction, the stranger, that sort of thing. How can that come about? The core of ethics, after all, has to do with people. Me relating to you, you relating to me. I want to be clear about those things, and you can't get clear except in two ways. Talk with people who listen and who talk back, and I can listen. Good students, colleagues that way. And second, in writing. Writing for me has always been a matter of discovery. Never knowing exactly where I was going with it.
So we haven't touched on yet, in terms of your sort of academic pedigree, a little bit more about Spiegelberg.
Herr Spielberg.
Yeah. So how did you come to be reading him?
He was at St. Louis University at that time. No, what is it? Washington University at St. Louis. And was the sponsor of several meetings of the SPEP Society. And he was anxious to get his own thing going. He was always fascinated by coming and going. I go from here to there and I notice so-and-so, and I'm trying to come back and it's all different. Reversing it, what that's all about. I think particularly if you're interested in the foundations of ethics and morality, he's really incredibly interesting. He'd written that wonderful essay in the 40s, 44 I think it was, on equality. That did fascinate a lot of people, including people in analytic philosophy, found that really good. But he never did other things like that. He just worked with these students and let it go at that, and did his thing, and then he died.
Can we talk a little bit about
Pellegrino?
Pellegrino then?
Ed was just a remarkable man in his vision of things. I got this call from Ed and asked me to look into the possibility of going into a medical center. And so I went up Christmas time in 1970, and it looked just absolutely incredible. What an opportunity, I thought, not knowing anything at all about them.
Was this Stony Brook?
That was at Stony Brook. It just looked incredibly fascinating.
What did Ed want? What did he want?
Yeah.
He wanted somebody, as a philosopher, he had seen me before. He asked Nathanson about things, Maurice Nathanson, one of my teachers, about this, and I was recommended as somebody who might be interested in that, to set up a program in humanities and social sciences at the medical center, which was not yet going, the medical school. It had a year or two to go yet before they got their first class in. And Ed had gotten a grant from some place in one of the big foundations in New York to fund all of this. He knew philosophy, understood it, and knew phenomenology and respected it as a discipline in philosophy to explore and discover.
Do you know what he was reading of yours? Do you know what he read of yours? Do you recall? I mean,
No,
obviously
he
he was
never-
moved enough to invite you to come to this program.
He never mentioned that. The book on phenomenology I wrote, he read that.
Oh, the introduction.
So
Yeah.
he read that book.
Yeah,
Another great
yeah.
book.
And he read articles, I don't know why. I remember giving a paper at a meeting that he was at. I don't remember the guy I wrote on. He was a physiologist or a neurologist writing on something, and I wrote a paper response basically to him. And I think he read that. He never really mentioned much that he'd read of mine. Anyway, he asked me to come up and look at that, and I did, and I thought this was absolutely fascinating, and I agreed to go. It's thanks to Pellegrino that there is a thing called medical ethics formally conceived today. And how in the world he ever talked the state of New York legislature to creating the first formal title position in medical school for a philosopher, I'll never know. But I had it my second year there. I was funded by a foundation my first year, and the second year I was actually a part of the state government, state university system.
Was that program? Was that the first medical humanities program? Were there others around the country?
There were several. Yeah, there had been some at Pennsylvania had started theirs. Penn State
One of hers.
had begun to do theirs with Clauser and others. There was something out. This was one of the very first formally established programs, but there were a few others now here and there. I don't remember all of that. There were just a couple.
What year was that? Was this 71 or 72?
72 when I became a state employee. 72.
Yeah, 72. So
71 I was an interloper. 72 I was legitimate.
philosopher in the medical center in 1972.
Ed had a good vision. I had 2 offices. Why? Because every medical person there had a second office called his laboratory. So I had my office and my laboratory. What was in the laboratory? My library.
Excellent.
Yeah. I thought that was, what a vision. My colleagues in the philosophy department couldn't believe it. I had 2 offices.
Now, where did you meet your students? In your office or in your laboratory? Where did you get your work done?
Depends on what they wanted to do.
Okay, good answer.
They wanted me to sign their recommendations. I was in the office. The other things we talked about in my library.
As it should be.
Isn't that interesting?
I've heard you say you left Stony Brook after just 2 years because you didn't see a future in medicine for yourself. What changed 8 years later?
The main thing was, intellectually, I needed to have that context that I had merely flavored, touched at Stony Brook. When I got contacted by Vanderbilt for this chair they had there, the Stallman chair, I posed the question to them at that point. Would you allow me to get into the clinical world at all? Because I want to know what ethics is all about from where the problems start. Not from what I might bring over here. They thought that was fabulous. So when I went to Vanderbilt, I mean, it was really new game. And so it was a matter of trying to explore. So what did I do? I asked Millie, can I go on rounds with you? I said, sure, come on. And Miss Battleship took me on rounds with her.
Did you start to go on rounds regularly?
I started off with Millie,
I mean, with Millie, but then like, did
and
you?
then with John Flexner, and then several people in cardiology asked me to come along. Obstetrics and pediatrics preoccupied me for a long time. They were the ones who were convinced they had the greatest, or at least the most serious problems that they really couldn't handle. Eventually, I got approached by the chairman of the board. I remember his name now. About a year and a half later, he said, "You need to start you a consultation service." And I said, like a bright young philosopher, "What's that?"
What do you mean ethics? Ethics with a consultation service?
What? I don't understand that. Well, you'd have to charge. Charge? Charge who? And, well, maybe the hospital will pay for you. Those are all brand new topics for me.
Mm-hmm.
But he asked me to formulate a proposal for me to go in and consult on ethical issues whenever they arise. Be called in mainly by the doctors, of course. Why? Because it's their patients, and they're legally liable, so they got to call you. You can't mess around with the patient without talking to the doctor. That's the instruction I got. That changed later, but that's what I had then. So then I developed a protocol for that. You remember that? You saw that first protocol, didn't you, Mark?
Mm-hmm.
And I showed that to, mind you, who did I meet? The heads of every clinical service at Vanderbilt.
Indeed.
That's a lot of big-time folks. Every chairman of a department was there too. In a big room, big conference room, and I presented my protocol to them.
What did they say?
They said, "What do we need this for?" The main message was that. And whoever that guy was, the medical board chairman at that time, who had asked me to do this, answered the questions. I just explained what I thought would be important and how it might be helpful. And I was basing it on almost nothing. A few times I'd been talking and so on. But they wanted that, they wanted it seriously. And about 3 weeks later, I got approved. To my great astonishment, in early 1983, I think it was, I'm not sure now. But anyway, it got approved, and I started. The one great puzzle, by the way, came to me later. Remember Norman Ermey?
Uh-huh.
He was the hospital director.
Right.
He couldn't figure out what to call me. What am I going to call you? I don't know. Call me philosopher. No, can't do that. Can't do that. Nobody knows what a philosopher is. And somewhere he had heard the word ethicist. And he sent a memo. All clinical heads, directors, and department chairman, that Zaner's now our ethicist.
Given the stories and the context that you've described up till now, what were you learning?
Whose say-so is really the say-so that counts in a particular case.
Right.
And surprising sometimes to learn somebody's insight turns out to be important. A nurse's, a young medical student, just happens to have a knack for certain things, but mostly, of course, it's the one in command, the attending, who makes these decisions, who calls the shots.
So these are the actual languages and relationships that occur in which decisions are made about the patient.
And the reason that's important, by the way, for me, was important then. I was trying to figure out several sorts of things. Why is it that somebody calls me for what they call an ethics problem? What do they understand by that? And what is it about these particular facts and cases, the particular case, the facts about this case, that prompted that kind of question? Not, is that the real issue here? It may or may not be that, as I found out real quickly.
Right.
But what is it that strikes these doctors as ethically problematic about that particular set of circumstances, as opposed to what I was beginning to perhaps to appreciate, maybe something else? And how can I so formulate my concern in a way that addresses their understanding so that I can make a difference there?
Mm-hmm.
So I was learning to appreciate what the experience of illness is like for those who have it and for those who recognize and treat it, and what they think about it as opposed to what the patient's thinking about it,
and how those two interact. How do you help give them a language to say what's on their minds when they may not even know what's on their minds? I was learning that. And that is, as I began to understand real quickly, wow, that ain't easy. That's not something that just comes right off the face of the language or of the situation, that you have to go probing for it in a way that doesn't obliterate it, doesn't embarrass it, doesn't insult it, but gives it a chance to be heard. That's where I first came across, I think, the notion of the voices. The multiple voices you're always hearing. And how do you help those voices, people give voice to what their concerns are? My job, it turned out, among other things, was to try to help promote that kind of conversation to go on in a way that they could say, ah, yeah, that's right. Or they could acknowledge its accuracy and its adequacy for what their concerns were. And sometimes you go too far.
How can you tell when you go too far?
They'll let you know.
I always have that question.
One of the most important things I think I learned, at least in dealing with people who are facing crises, medical crises of illness, injury, genetic circumstance, whatever it is that they're always very serious. They're very rarely taking it lightly.
Right.
And even those who joke about it are doing something else there. So you can always, it seems to me, count on the intent of the people to get straight about what's going on with me. That's pretty much, you can count, that's one of the few things you can really take for granted. They really want to know.
Right.
If they didn't really want to know, they wouldn't spend 2 minutes with you. My turn to narrative is precisely rooted right there. That relating the story, if I can do it correctly, if I can do it right, and that's not always the case, but even a bad story gets me going. Okay? Even a foreshortened story can start a process that otherwise is not available.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing I became convinced of eventually. That the methodology for this has to be narrative. There's just no way around it.
I want to pick up on something that came up in a prior conversation. There was some concern.
That's why I changed shirts.
I know, I could tell. Making you sweat before. So, one of the things that you were talking about was affiliation as being kind of core to both the academic work that you did and then the clinical work that you did. And there's a real question, which is, there's a potency in affiliation. And so as you sharpen awareness about affiliation, that potency becomes greater.
Let me begin in a different way.
Yeah.
See if I can't get to what I had in mind. There are two major things that I thought I was beginning to see in concrete encounters with patients, with doctors or with nurses or whatever, okay? One is, it formulated first as a challenge, an issue, a difficulty. How is it that when, as Shader says, somebody smiles, I'm focused on her happiness? Or when somebody is groaning and wincing and so on, that I'm aware of the pain, not just of the physical embodiment of that or expression of it. That is, it's a question of intersubjectivity again, of being related to the other and apprehending the other to the best of my ability. Being able to relate to that and to do a kind of, if you will, understanding of what's going on, to be understanding. That's one facet of it, okay? What is it that I can say about that act? And the term I began to use was affiliating. I'm with the other. The other side of that was the thing that I had long learned, I thought, from the work of Marcel.
particularly his understanding of disponibilité, this being available to the other, being at the beck and call of the other, so that when a physician is talking to a patient or, palpating or whatever, there's a kind of being available to the other when, for instance, if the doctor does this and that hurts, and I do that, he immediately understands that and backs off. There's a kind of being available to the other that's responsive to that. Affiliation came to mean for me that act, and there is indeed a potency, I think you're right in that. It's incredibly powerful. Ask a patient who has a doctor who responds to her wincing. It's a very powerful act, that pulling back or asking, how does that feel? Does that hurt? And so on. And it's the thing I think we have to learn to expand the notion of listening to incorporate, or observing even. So they become richer notions because what they are is acts of being available to the other, being responsive to the other's appeal, and attempting to be understanding in the context of that. So not only to understand what's going on, but to be understanding to the person. And that's what that power came to mean for me.
With that as the background, then you spent 10 years immersed, 20 years, in the clinical.
Yeah.
So how did what you've just said grow? Or is it that it became evidence?
I guess I was ready for it, but it wasn't clear to me what I should be doing, and what I should be doing in the sense of being recognized as doing by others. I'm keenly aware, was keenly aware then and am now, of the awkwardness of being a philosopher in a situation like that, in a society like this, where being a philosopher is an extraordinarily unique, rare thing. Count the number of philosophers in among 340 million people in the United States. You appreciate that. Moreover, you have to learn to appreciate that others don't know what in the world you're doing. Not only why would you study that, my grandfather, but also what the hell are you doing here with that? Are you changed somehow? You're doing different now? So it took me a long time to figure out, how can I not be awkward, if you will? How can I not create a kind of awkwardness by being who I am in a society that makes very little room for people like myself? It would be as if a poet came in there, not simply as a person, but as a poet. What do you do there, poet? What do you do there, philosopher? Why are you here now? And what do you hope to do, and how can you, as in medicine, you have to be helpful. How can you help me out? Now, in a way, Vanderbilt exercised an incredible amount of just sheer, unadulterated faith in me that I was worth it. Now, why they did it, I don't know why they did it. I got some figuring out to do. I think they didn't know what they were doing. I think that having a, quote, Stallman chair and Millie Stallman and others on my side was very important. Having Dean Chapman stop me in the hallway one day and say, "Hey, Zaner, you're the first new program we've had at Vanderbilt in 36 years. Now I'm a program?" I was me. That's all I was. I had no program. So it was always a voyage of discovery, of trying to figure out what it is I was doing, that I could do, that would actually help people.
So can you give some articulation to what sort of evidence you were looking for in actual moments, clinical moments, to say, I should continue on this line, or it's time to leave?
Well, I learned that I should repeat what people tell me in a conference.
But what's the evidence for that? What were you finding as the evidence? Just because people afterwards would say that was really helpful?
Well, you can not only say that they were really helped, they actually were. They really believed that. And if you began to explore, as I did with some patients, but particularly with some of the staff that was there, what is it about that was so helpful? Well, we said it, but we weren't really thinking about that, I was told. Okay, they're not really thinking about getting the parents in and not simply talking at them, but listening to them. Ask them what's on their minds. Ask them where are they right now. Ask them what do they think about their kid now. Have they given up on the kid? Have they given up on us? Have they given up on the hospital? Are they genuinely in despair? Do they give a shit? Who cares? You got to find out, which means you got to ask pointed questions with the intent of listening carefully to the answers, to try to figure out what is it that I can then say at the end of a conference with them, say, well, this was useful or this was not useful. So I've got to be alert to the sorts of experiences, the sorts of expressions from them and from others that indicate, in the usual ways of human indication, like, oh yes, I understand that now, and you see people raise their eyebrows and look at you, or twitch their nose, or whatever it may be. You have to learn to be attentive to that. That's exhausting. But I couldn't find another way to do it than that, particularly in the first years, when I was looking for evidence for my own usefulness. That what I was doing wasn't hurting, but was helping, by the way. Ethics became a matter for me of what's worthwhile to you, patient, to you, doctor, to you, administrator. What are you looking for? Fame? Fortune? Political clout? And we often didn't share those. It was often difficult even to get people to think about that. But I was lucky. At Vanderbilt, they really didn't care. They let me do it. I think that's remarkable. It's just, I mean, think about it, Stu. You too, Mark. That was just remarkable what we were allowed to do.
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
For sure.
Early on in my beginnings at Vanderbilt, in the clinical world, I had to have people with me. And I was very, very fortunate in having a few people, one or two people sometimes, to go with me, to be on rounds, to watch me and observe me, and, if you will, put me to the test later. In the course of initially talking with some people sitting here, others in the room, or just simply the patient in the bed and the family, usually, the beginning for me of talking, of listening, is the voyage of discovery of the crisis that's going on here. That's a bit heavy word,
Right.
but of what really going on in this particular thing, this particular case, what's on their minds, what are you concerned about? Whether it's Tom about his job, or the husband about his wife and some program don't let her in, or whatever it may be, you have to learn to discover that, okay? But you can only do this for so long. You're there for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, depends.
Right.
Then you leave, because you gotta leave, because they get tired of you. They got other things to do. The doctor comes in, you gotta do a test, whatever it may be, you're only limited. That's the pathos of every clinical consultation, is that it stops, and you're not done.
Mm-hmm.
They're not finished. You gotta figure some way of continuing this, if you can, hopefully, at another occasion. So then you retire back to your office, and you ask people, what happened? That is to say, tell me what you thought you saw, narrate. Give me some stories, to put it crudely. These are always unfinished, always poorly framed. But tell me what you thought went on. About, say, this, about that, about the other. When that husband raised his fist up, what was he doing? And then you begin to get a little bit more understanding of this discovery. Oh, you think that's what's going on? Maybe that was going on there. I hadn't thought of that. When we go to see them next tomorrow, let's make sure we think about that out loud. Okay? Now, you don't get the chance to do it. They got discharged. Then you're left just kind of hanging. You have to have people around you, otherwise you're going to collapse in this clinical world.
So in that move, in terms of the objective, one might say that this is part of what makes people who do ethics a pain in the ass, which is they haven't understood that every patient we see is just the setup for the next patient we see, and you guys want to keep dragging it out. I gotta go see 20 more today. So why be asking all these questions? Because that doesn't help me see the next one.
But it does help you. It does help you, even though it won't be obvious for 20 years or 10 years or next month. It does help you. You begin to be alert to things that otherwise you might forget, that otherwise you might not notice. This was a point made to me, by the way, by Eric Cassell. He alerted me to that difficulty of meeting patient after patient after patient.
So is it, just so I'm understanding here, is part of it sounds like it's about the particular content. I'll be better able to answer this kind of question or that kind of question, but part of it also sounds like it's about being alert. It's about maintaining the alertness or...
And never forgetting
No.
that you're always alert to an individual, unique individual.
So it's, to shift to something else that has been said before, it's to maintain the focus of wonder.
Yes.
To keep
Yes.
wonderment alive
Yes.
going forward.
Thank you. That's right. I would say that more out loud, but it sounds kind of silly.
Yeah.
Gotta be one. Sure, you gotta wonder. It's an astonishing thing that you're allowed to do. And if you don't appreciate how astonishing it is to get within one of the most powerful institutions of the Western world for 3,000 years at least, and to be admitted to that world, not simply saying, oh yeah, come on to my conference, or let's go out and have some coffee, but to be in with that doctor's patients for whom that doctor is legally accountable, and for him or her to allow you to be in there and then to be free to probe. Man, that's an incredible thing. I don't know how many people appreciate that. I hope they do. I know it was stunning to me that after 10 to 15 years I was still astonished at it. You know, thank goodness I was, because you can become inured to that sort of thing if you're not careful. You can become dull to it. You can become proud. Oh, I'm a philosopher in medicine. You know, look at me. My badge.
Yeah.
Who in his right mind would ever ask somebody else to go do this?
Yeah. I mean, or who would
Who
say,
would train you, Virginia? I mean, come on.
who would
Who
say,
the hell am I to say,
let's
come in here and
continue.
be terrified?
let's continue to do that.
All right, all right, all right. Maybe, I don't know how to answer that ultimately.
It's just on the way.
I just have to say, what an incredible amount of confidence I had that I would survive this.
Okay.
Well, let's hope you still have that confidence going, because I think Mark's leading.
Just a minute. Just a minute. I think it is manifestly true to confront somebody else's terror, as you put it, their anxiety, more everyday word, what they're afraid of, to confront what they don't want to face. You never know if you're going to get there or not. You never know whether you should. And you're tampering with ultimate things there. Maybe it's essential, maybe it's not. Maybe only some people can take that, I don't know. I know that every patient that I ever met was in some sense or other terrified of dying, of being maimed, of loss, of ultimate kind of changes. They'll no longer love me if I don't have my legs. They're all of them. I mean, some illnesses are easy to get through, I suppose, and I guess we're very lucky to have those. Others are hard. They stay with us. And that I go in and mess around with that also affects me in a powerful way. I am myself at issue. No question. And you got to be able to tolerate that. You got to be able to recognize it, to face it square on, and to figure out what in the world you're going to do when you leave this particular room and go back to your office. So, you know, being a clinical ethics consultant is to risk a great deal on their part, and on your part, on the institution's part, on your colleagues' part, on your students' part. Everything's an issue. If you don't learn to can't live with that, then I think you shouldn't be a philosopher. That's what we do. And being a clinical philosopher is even worse, because it has immediate consequences of the sort that can really damage. And there's some people that simply can't take it. All right, you recognize that. That doesn't mean they're bad people. It means they're simply not designed, in whatever way it may be, to handle the kinds of issues that you're going to face.
Two things jumped out that are different than maybe what it appears to be. One is, so you've noted that people always have choice. Always have choice. Except you've taken pretty seriously Spiegelberg's idea that, no, it's actually an accident that I am. I have no choice.
Yep.
And two, you've begun from the earliest description of the death of your mother through now, as you're of that age, with the wonder of what happens to me next.
Yeah.
And I don't have any choice over that either. So it's kind of interesting. I'm just struck by the, well,
Yeah.
you always got choice, except you don't have choice to be born. And whether you have a choice or not to die, because you could kill yourself, so you have, I suppose, that. But the question of, but what happens after, doesn't look like I have
Absolutely.
choice.
Thank you very much for reminding me, but you're right. And that constantly textures everything I do, has always done, textured my life that way. Let me put it this way. Yeah, Spiegelberg's right, and I'm thankful that he wrote that. I'm thankful because I learned from that, and it helped me understand the work I was doing and the work I continue to do. Namely, sure, free choice, doubtless. I think one of the great disasters of ontology of human beings is they got free choice. Because some people just choose weird, radically weird. Some are psychotic choices. Some are just crazy, dumb choices. Some are unthoughtful, emotionally, all that spectrum of things. Very, very few choices are well made. Though I think each of us understands a well-made choice, if we really think about it some. But most of us choose not to think about anything. True. Still, what gives that its power is that we're unchosen to be here. Nobody asked me. The same thing came out many, many times in talking with patients, how they didn't choose to be sick. So why me? Isn't just an exaggeratedly personal question. It says to us, despite our ability, our necessity to choose, there are much in our lives that's unchosen. We're highly textured by this dialectic of free and not free, choose, choice, and no choice. And it's true. I know I'm going to die, at least that's what everything instructs me. But internally, do I know that? No, what I know when I think about time is that it just goes on and on and on. I don't want to get into ontology at this point.
I know you don't want to get into ontology, but you opened it up.
No, Stu did.
No, you did yesterday.
Did I really?
So this structure,
How shameless of me.
the structure of time, I think, is an advance in terms of what we're talking about, in the way that I want to ask, doesn't it set out the structure of a promise
If I pay attention,
that there will be a future?
I know, if I pay attention to the currents of inner time awareness, I look at any moment of time and I see it's highly structured in at least these ways. It always is a pointing to the past, an ongoing of something now, and a pointing to the future. Every moment. There is no moment that doesn't have an arrow pointing forward in one payment. That's all I meant. Look, if you're talking about very concrete terms, yes.
Right.
Certainly.
I am talking
in terms
that
of illness. Every one of us, when sick, is undergoing an experience of hoping to get well. Of the time you undergo while your wounds scar up, and why it finally disappears, and so on. So that every time you meet a patient undergoing illness, you're always involved in a complex temporal experience. Sure.
So what I mean is that if that was closed, if it was time as if somehow we could know the beginning and end, there wouldn't be the openness, there wouldn't be the vulnerability so that anything new could happen.
Yeah.
And we believe that new things happen.
There wouldn't be wonder.
It would be, and
True,
and
true.
the vulnerability is what allows newness of anything, a new event. So it allows for the uniqueness of my own experience as mine, but it also allows for the intersubjectivity of me to share time with you. So how do we talk about the particular relevance of the normative values that are already going on in the situation?
I don't know why you don't ask a hard one. You could, you know.
Just warm it up.
Yeah, just warm it up. Well, look, one of the things I suppose that anybody is perforce aware of, even if you're brand new to a clinical situation, is that people are there partly because they want to be there. They have to be there. They're looking for something to help them to be there that helps to constitute the normativity of that situation. They want to get well. They're hoping to get well. They are praying to get well, to get better, or for their loved one to do so, or their child, whatever it may be. People are there because they're afraid, they're anxious, they want to have help, etc. They're also facing the prospect of loss, possibly even of immediate death, of loss of limb, loss of ability to manage life. All of that is there. So it's textured by a sort of obligatory trust. You've got to trust them. That, in a way, you know, they're anxious, they're on the edge, they're having to trust people that are doing serious things to them, and you hope they're doing it right. By asking the sorts of questions that are not normal to healthcare professionals, discussions with them, you begin to alert them that you're onto something else now. And maybe, as very often I was told, I'd rather talk to you because you're not a doctor.
Right.
I went to explore a lot of that stuff. So yeah, it's already textured, no question. And sure, we have to be alert to that, and we have to recognize that it's being taken for granted that, quote, it's important, quote, what is said, what is done, so on. That was the first clue to me, if you will, that there was something going on that I wasn't really grasping in this conversation, this use of language. And as you well know, I spent a long time, years, trying to figure out exactly what is it about that language, about those words that I'm hearing from people, and even if, and also from the doctor who, as I would now say, begin to tell you a story that's important that you listen to. They think it's important. That's why it's important for you. I may or may not think it's critical or important, but they think it's important enough to tell me. And they tell me in ways that has a beginning and several little sidelines and so on, and little interruptions and so on. Then I have to leave, or they have to leave, whatever. It's a partial tale they're telling me. So when I was writing notes, for example, in the chart, I tried to find a way, never successfully, to capture what was being said in those few encounters I would have with them that would be important enough for me to alert the people who read charts to listen to look at. They're concerned about this, and try to, what that may be, whatever it happens to be. You might not be right, but you begin to alert not only that family that you're the person that they can indeed tell these things to, but the doctors begin to see you as somebody to whom they must pay attention for certain features of this case they hadn't thought about. They don't pay attention to. I'm focused on their interrelationships, for example. Doctor is focused on the illness. Perfectly reasonable.
So it's more than just reflecting back what's been said about that. It's
Sure.
actually watching, interacting with how people behave, right? And this, I'm trying to get to sort of that's what your work brought to the clinical environment is that there are whole sets of interactions that need to be paid attention to.
Yeah, and there's also this. There were occasions when a physician's judgment, quote, they're not ready to hear that yet, about needing to withdraw, was incorrect. They were ready. The doctor was voicing, if you will, some of his or her own concern, far more than reflecting what he heard from patients or what he observed from their conduct, behavior, words, their sad acceptance of the inevitable and so on. And there's no telling in advance what's going to happen. I think that's crucial to understand in this clinical work. You really don't know what you're going to find out. So you have to be constantly probing attentively and listening and observing and so on in order to figure out what the hell's going on. Failure to do that can result in some disasters, as we both know. Mistreatment, or what, patients not understanding what had happened, and so they're angry, they're frustrated, and so on. We try to avoid that by making sure people understand each other. So how do I so relate to you when it's somebody else's life at stake, your patients, that I can get you to discuss things with me that are on your mind? When one guy once told me, that's what a good friend would do. All I can do is say, yeah, if it's a particularly alert good friend who also has the confidence of all your patients and their families, and who's talked with them and listened to them and tried then to figure out what really is what's worthwhile for them. Why are they so concerned about so-and-so? Yeah, a good friend would do that. And I regard myself as your good friend, because I'm bringing you to bringing to your attention something that you haven't paid attention to before and you need to be careful about.
So that seems to outline a narrative.
Well, it certainly began to suggest that to me. And what I began to do, and I sort of speak, I like to say it this way because it really is the truest way. I found myself writing narratives one day at home, trying to figure out a particular case that I was really troubled by. It was very complicated, lots of people involved, and I couldn't quite understand what was going on. And I had to understand because I was being asked for help by both the doctors and the nurses, as well as the people, what's going on. And the only way I could figure out to answer those concerns was to write it out as a narrative, a story. Things I didn't quite remember what somebody said, but then I would sort of just fill it in myself, just to see if I couldn't understand something. And that was why, if you will, narrative became, for me, the path for doing this, the method.
So did I hear this right? Because I think what I heard is that the author of the narrative is actually the stranger. As opposed to the authoritative figure, even though you're the author, you're actually the stranger.
You can
who's
pretty
trying
well
to...
count on being a stranger if you're a philosopher.
Yeah, but it's that's how you, through the narrative, to find out what's at stake,
Yeah.
is that you're letting the story write. You're not, even though you're the author of it, you're not the one who is authoritative in it.
That's true.
That's what makes it strange. And there's where you come to find the value of what's in it. What's the it? It's what's unfolding.
Or you're tracing.
I think that's a nice insight, yeah.
But I keep coming back, and you're tracing things like what is valued. You're tracing things like caring.
That's why I came, yes, Mark, let me interrupt, where I came to use the word worthwhile. What's worth it rather than value?
Mm-hmm.
What's so important about that? What's worthwhile for you? Can you live with that afterwards? Will life be worth living? And I think that in the concrete language, in the concrete lives of people, is very of people who find themselves in a hospital with a sick one, is precisely that kind of language.
These are the sort of things that you're trying to trace out so that you, as you said, can fill in the meaning.
So what you're presenting is that the backdrop of all of this, or the confining element of this, is care.
Yeah.
That you have to begin with a caring orientation.
I tell you what, if I didn't care, I sure wasted a lot of time.
No, that's not what we're saying. No, it's much,
Okay.
it's much more that this is not philosophical in the sense that people think that the distancing is somehow a not caring.
Yeah.
It is in fact backgrounded by caring enough to be honest.
Yeah. And to be
Rigorously.
I can use another set of words now without, I hope, being misunderstood. And to have the courage to say so outright. And sometimes you have to be very blunt. Sometimes you have to be very subtle. But you have to be capable and willing to say it. Okay? And to say it in ways you hope will be understood, and if you're not, to be alert enough to realize that and shift your direction, shift your language to other ways of talking. Otherwise, I mean, you won't be doing what you need to do. You won't be caring for people. This is a discipline of caring, if you will. I told you about the one case concern I had, this very, very, very profoundly dear friend who died, and I was there with him and holding my hand, and I held his, and he passed, and I asked him to let me know what it's like. Not stupid to ask that. I even wrote a poem with that word in those terms. No, but why? Later we were up and visiting our cousins in Nacogdoches in East Texas. Out at a new lake in the parking lot, I got a phone call. From him! There it is on my phone. There it is on my phone. From him! So I answer it. It's not him. It's his wife. But oddly, she swears she didn't call me. Am I supposed to read that as a recondite message? Huh? Rich, full of nothing but blank symbols. Signifying what? I don't know. We were there the other day, by the way, too. 2 or 3 years later. Same place. And my cousin, who was there at the time, let's hope you don't get another phone call, Dick.
So he remembered.
Oh, yeah. Everybody remembered who was in that car. Let me tell you something now, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Telling the story turns out, at least for poor old Zaner, to be an extraordinarily difficult thing. Because you have to be honest to all of what you've been hearing. And if you can't remember it all the subtleties of an actual conversation, all the little looks and twitches and such that people have in conversations, then you have to be good enough, honest enough to construct it.
To fill it in.
To fill it in. And boy, that's hard. It's so easy, I learned, to mislead by using a certain shift of language to try to make something clear, as opposed to another that you might have taken. What Kierkegaard called indirect communication turns out to be, one hell of a hard thing to do. If you're doing it deliberately, as you must, talking indirectly. And boy, that's hard. But that's what a good storyteller does. He lets it be obvious.
So, does storytelling have to be writing, or is storytelling actually part of the practice of being present as ethics consultant?
Both. And both have their different discipline. I do believe that the writing of narratives, or the thinking in narrative terms within situations, as we've been doing today, is absolutely vital to clinical ethics.
Yeah, but so So what you've said is thinking in narrative is actually how you do clinical philosophy.
Yeah. Writing is always a discovery of its own kind. It takes on a life of its own, for one thing, whereas storytelling, oral, sure takes on its own life and gets retold, and things get changed in the course of that, and you don't care, as long as you did your thing when you said it. That's a whole range that I haven't thoroughly explored yet, that I one time, if I ever have the time, want to try to explore some. But you know how hard I worked trying to figure out what in the world storytelling was all about, as opposed to reporting. I mean, I messed around with that so much that I got bored with it and just started doing the challenge of writing a story, and found that if I just kind of let things go and just let it flow, then it worked a lot better.
So using your own compulsion to write as the example, what does that teach us about doing clinical ethics work?
For one thing, for me, I think for you and Mark and Virginia and others of the people that I've been able to help along the way, it helped us articulate, first orally, the complex concerns of affiliation, of responsiveness to individuals, complete strangers. Also taught us something about the pathos of being unable to continue those when the people went home. Or when they simply said, I've had enough. No more. It teaches us something about humility, I think. About not claiming too much for what you've done, or what you've written about. But it also taught you that there are ways of saying things. And maybe if nothing else, record that. It gets written somewhere, if only digitally, and then I can turn to that and maybe learn some more about that. And I'm one that just is fascinated by this constant wonder. I didn't ask for this, that's the way it is.
So is this why you have many, for some stories that are so charged and so demanding, you have different variations of them?
Yeah,
And I take it that you're not quite satisfied yet.
that's right. You keep trying, you keep working. The trouble is you keep growing. You keep learning. You keep noticing. You keep figuring out. And that means something's got to change and shift a little bit. So you tell the same story 14 times until you learn the discipline of getting it right. And you never quite make that. I don't. Maybe there are people who can do that. I've read some awfully good stories, but you know. So I told the story of my mother at least 7 times. For example.
Oh, 7, okay. I've been
Oh, I haven't published all of them, no.
Oh, okay, I was gonna say, because I don't recall 7 publications of that, but you have told it many times.
I have told it
And
many
each
times.
time there's slightly different.
And every time there's something else I noticed, I learned, I figured out,
So you'll permit me this question.
maybe. Yes, go ahead.
It's been a long time. There's been different versions. We're trying to talk about the caring and courage it takes to fill in these kinds of stories. What can you teach us about what you learned from your story with your mom? Because we need to learn that.
I don't know. I've never had that put to me. I have to think about it some. And I won't be, what we say now won't be the best.
about my mother. I learned, among other things, Mark, as I was writing that story out. I don't know why I even started to do it initially. Just that there were things about that troubled me. And I wanted to make sure I understood. And the thing that troubled me most was my own interaction, my own part in removing her ventilator and her breathing tube. Because she kept breathing. All the nurse did was unhook. Tube was still down, so she was still going on. I wanted to honor my mother in a way that the situation she was in did not honor her. And I wanted, the only way I figured to do this is to go back and relive it and write it out as best as I could for myself. And listening to the audio tapes that we had her make, you know, I put some of those in there. Those were very hard to listen to. But I wanted to learn, how can one do that? Be profoundly intimate, yet distant enough to write it. In a certain way, that's what you have to do if you're telling stories about illness in a hospital. It doesn't matter who the patient is. Being there is oftentimes all that's necessary for a patient. Just having somebody to look at may be enough. But it's that intimacy and distance and that dialectical process that goes on there that's so vital for making a good story live. Not just written up, but make it made alive. And my mother, I can't even remember that damnable doctor who refused to do it. I often said to myself, I'd like to have a word with that guy. And I said, why? You know, he's hopeless. He's in the wrong profession. He ought to be in the golf course as a groundskeeper. He doesn't belong in an intensive care unit. And I want to tell him that. You don't treat people that way. But that was the early days, when using the word philosopher was just alien to people. Alien to my mother. Why do you want to do that, Dick? Well, because I can't do anything else, Mom. Anyway, I wanted to honor her, which means telling her story in the moment that we were. She was not alert then, but I wanted her to know that I cared very much, and that I wanted to treat her that way, and that what the doctor had done was not right. And the nurse helped, but she didn't do it right either. She just unconnected. You had that tube out. And I had to be there while she died. While the little did a final flatline. I had to be there the whole time. And thank goodness somehow I had the presence to do it. And I had to write it. And I'm not sure, I mean, none of this was figured out in advance. Going back over that tale, I think what I was trying to do, and eventually perhaps succeeded in doing to some extent, is saying, here's what we have to do when we're with people that we dearly love and need to be allowed to go. We have to let go. And here's how I did it. No, here's how I found myself doing it. And here's what I had found myself having to live through in order to do it, to honor her.
And in a way, it helped to instruct me to say that this is what I had to do with patients who were dying, to families who were dying. I think that may be why I felt such sympathy with them, such empathy with them, having been through it that way. And I'm so happy I wrote it out one time, and then another time, and another time, and another time, because it helped me be with people who are hurting, who need care, and who are with their loved ones and don't know how to handle that. And sometimes those people are doctors, sometimes they're nurses, sometimes they're family members. That's the best I can answer, Mark.
Just to be clear then, thank you, you're welcome. So,
I lived this clowning back over here so many years.
so the writing of the story, the problem is that people who do narrative ethics think that the end is the story.
Right.
As if the writing of the story leads to the product of the story, and then you're done and then you move on.
No.
And it's the method, I think that what Dick was saying is, you write the story, you produce the story is a marker from which you move forward and come back, and move forward and come back, which is why you rewrite the story at some later time, which whether it is as putting pen to paper or keystroke to screen, or it is in my recollection.
Right, and part of what I'm saying is an equal component of the method is having the courage to do that kind of work, but also speak to the others in the situation when you are not sure that you do have it accurately stated yet, even about their story, and so you're willing to learn from them where you have
Yes.
not yet.
So this is the wolf. This is the
This is
surrender and catch.
Yes. Yeah. I would like several of my poems to be known publicly. One of them is Philosophers on the Way Things Are. A German dedicated to his mountain nods, Gilvorfenheit, and sips a beer. A Frenchman steeped in massive thought winks like worms in apples, coiled and unpleasant to behold, if indeed you can, and looks cockeyed for Pierre, as a buckled Russian torments God with babies impaled on swords and sends an idiot back to Switzerland, babbling. The peasant from Germany peers out from eyes laid like tombs, deep, deep in Dasein's earth, is heard to say, when born, I am old enough to die. The Russian adds with a grin, gaunt and twisted, and what after all do you think of Kirillov? The Frenchman, nothing.
And I'm asking the hard questions, wondering what God lives. We find our way, living in the field of wonderment and hoping. We find our way. All is right with the world when I look to you. And when I look to you, the world falls into place.
All right, that's enough of that shit.
You got that last part there.
That's good.
Because that'll be the very end right there.